Welcome to the Health Stuff You Need to Know podcast. Information you need to thrive in our toxic modern world. I'm your host, Scott W. Kirkland. I hope you're ready because it is go time with the Wellness Web. Yeah. All right, welcome to Ep.7. This is going to be a Listener's Digest episode where I take 2 to 3 of my favorite podcasts and digest them down so you get lots of great information in a short amount of time. Before I get started, I would like to give a shout out to Soaring Eagle 178, who left me a 5-star review on iTunes. Soaring Eagle said, "This podcast has great info and great energy," and I couldn't agree more, even though I might be slightly biased. But I do feel there's lots of good info, and I like to think I have great energy. But you let me know what you think in the comments on the website, healthstuffounneedtoknow.com. The 5-star ratings on iTunes are particularly helpful to a new podcaster like me because iTunes is to the world of podcasting that Facebook is to the world of social media. It's where the bulk of the action really is. So to even get seen, you need a lot of 5-star reviews. So if you can please take the time, go out on iTunes, leave me a review. 5 stars, baby. Please. All right, enough begging for reviews. Time to get on with the show. The first podcast being digested is Episode 196 of the Model Health Show, Secrets of Living Healthfully to 100 and Why Goddesses Never Age, hosted by Shawn Stevenson and Jade Corel, with their guest, Dr. Christiane Northrup. Dr. Northrup gives a bit of her background. She comes from a family of medical doctors, and she is one herself, and she makes the point that she learned early on that doctors really don't have all the answers. And she made a little joke about the MD standing for medical deity, how in our society it seems there's this long-standing belief that doctors seem to know everything, but she's shattering that myth, and I think that's an important one to shatter because they don't. I like to also add that the MD can sometimes stand for a medical disaster because there's a new study out that shows that the third major leading cause of death in the United States is due to doctor error. So that's all the kind of mistakes that hospitals can make, doctors can make, drug interactions, and all kinds of things. So it's important not to just treat your doctor like some all-knowing God, because they aren't. Dr. Northrup talks a bit about the importance of beliefs, because if you believe that you're old and useless, then you have a tendency to become that. She mentions a study where they took a bunch of men in their 70s and they took them up to a monastery and they had them live as though that they were in their prime. They wanted them to behave their prime. So they tested their hearing, sight, cognitive abilities, all these things in advance, and they had them just live as if they were in their prime for 7 to 8 days, and then they retested and they showed improvement in every aspect. Dr. Northrup mentions another study of 500 centenarians, that's people who are 100 years of age or older, and looked at what they did to get there. And they all practiced the same, what they called the causes of health. And they are elevated cognition, righteous anger, and positive thinking. Righteous anger is when basically you stand up for yourself or for somebody else. So if you see someone who is mistreating someone and you stand up and speak your truth, then that actually improves your immunity, which is pretty amazing. She also mentions that we co-author our biology. That is, the people around you can affect your biology. So it is a good idea to not be around people who are negative all the time. Dr. Northrup also mentioned another cause of health, which is exalted emotional states, which really is finding things to celebrate and be happy about. I personally use a lot of gratitude. I like to focus on things that I'm grateful for. It can be something as simple as a beautiful sunset or a nice day, and or just being grateful that I've got food to eat, and I live in a house. I'm not homeless on the street. And I find when I focus on what I'm grateful for, I notice more and more things that I'm grateful for. So it's kind of like a snowball effect. So yeah, great habit to get into. The attitude of gratitude. They then talk about medical screening and how it's not benign and how certain tests can lead to false positives and scare the crap out of people when there really isn't reason to be. So they talk about mammograms in particular and how there's a condition called ductocarcinoma in situ, which is actually a benign tissue state, but it sounds like cancer. So people get told that they have this and then they freak out, and there's women out there doing double mastectomies when it's not really necessary. She also talks about the prostate test for men and how it's very uncommon for a man to actually die from cancer, and that generally people do have cancers in their body, but they generally don't go anywhere. She says they are states that you die with, not die from. She says that a better option than getting a mammogram, slamming your breasts together between a plate and hitting them with x-rays, is to use thermography, which is basically a fancy camera that checks for the heat signatures in your body. And of course, cancers will have a higher heat signature. So it's a non-invasive way. In regards to prostate cancer, she says that it's normal to have a small amount of prostate cancer and that people should practice active surveillance instead of having their prostate removed, because when you have your prostate removed, you have some quality of life issues. There's a lot of times there's issues with urination and with erectile dysfunction. So you got this lump of cancer that really wasn't that dangerous, removed, and you think, oh, okay, good, I don't have cancer, but you've lowered your quality of life significantly. Now, is that a good trade-off? She doesn't think so. Dr. Northrup says that the man who created the PSA test, that's the prostate screening test, later said that it was a huge mistake, and it was one of the worst things that could be perpetrated on human health. They do make the point that doctors generally are very intelligent people and very well-meaning, but the system really sets them up to be doing the wrong things, because there's a very large amount of focus on the bottom line, on making lots of money, and also on the litigious nature where people will sue doctors if they don't diagnose something. So the tendency is them to screen, but unfortunately all this screening isn't always benign, as we learned earlier. They then talk a bit about hormones and cortisol in particular, which is known as the stress hormone. And normally we'd have a small amount available if we need it for an emergency. But in this modern age that we're living in, that's changed so much, we're having a lot more cortisol being released. So a good example is, watching the news, and there's always stories about something you should be afraid of. It starts to spark our cortisol. That makes us want to crave sugar, because sugar gives us a bit of an opiate high to relieve that stress. Now, I personally don't watch the news at all, because most of it really isn't relevant information that you get. A lot of it is just a tragedy. That's just a bunch of crap that happens to people, and it really has no benefit for you in your life. And I find I just end up, feeling bad. So I stopped watching the news. And I find if there's a big story, people around me are talking about it. So it's not like I'm missing out on anything important. So if you're someone that watches the nightly news, that's part of your routine, why not try cutting it out for a few days and just see if it makes a difference in the way you feel? Dr. Northrup recommends doing a 2-week whole foods cleanse. That's where you cut out all added sugar, processed foods. Basically, when you go shopping, you stick to the outside of the grocery store aisles, skip the inner aisles where all the processed stuff is. And you'll find that your taste buds change, because your taste buds turn over very quickly. They regenerate very rapidly. And you'll find that the sweetness of an apple will be much more pleasurable and intense. And you'll find that desire for sugar to go down. And I have experienced this myself. I've tried going off all the sweeteners, and definitely your craving for sugar goes down. And when you do eat fruit or whatnot, it does seem a lot sweeter. And if you try eating candy again, it's like, ooh, that's way too sweet. So you could say that life is sweeter without added sugar. Dr. Northrup adds a nice tip. You can lower your chance of getting dementia by 70% if you learn partner dancing. All right, that will wrap up my digest of that podcast. That was episode 196 of the Model Health Show, Secrets of Living Healthfully to 100 and Why Goddesses Never Age, hosted by Shawn Stevenson and Jade Corel with their guest, Dr. Christiane Northrup. Now, if you're interested in learning more from Dr. Northrup, head on over to her website, drnorthrup.com, and check out her new book, Making Life Easy. The next podcast up for review is How to Slow Down Aging on the Revolution Health radio show hosted by Chris Kresser with his guest, Dr. Sara Gottfried. They start off the podcast talking about genes and disease expression. They both think that your genes play roughly 10%, maybe 15% in relation to what your health outcomes are going to be, but what matters most is your environmental exposure. So Chris gives the example of a gardener planting a seed in the garden. So the seed is the genetics, but what matters most is the watering, the nutrients in the soil, the sun that it gets. So much more of what really matters is the environment around, essentially the DNA. Certain people have genetic predisposition to certain diseases, but a large part of whether they're expressed or not depends on your lifestyle and the environment that you're in. Just because you have a gene that, say, gives you a predisposition for rheumatoid arthritis doesn't mean you'll get rheumatoid arthritis unless there's something that turns that gene on. They talk about the term inflammaging, which is a cross between two words, inflammation and aging, because they are highly related to each other. And they say that they can't think of any single disease that doesn't have inflammation as a component to it. So understanding inflammation is very important. They mention that different people are going to have different signs of this inflammation aging that occurs, but one of the very common ones is cognitive deficit. That is being forgetful, forgetting common words, forgetting names. This is a sign that your brain may have some inflammation and that you should think about doing something about it. They then start talking about specific genes, and we are living in an amazing age where we can get our genetics tested to see if we have predisposition to certain conditions, and then we can take proactive measures so that we don't have those genes expressed. They speak specifically about the FTO gene, which is one that is related to obesity. If expressed, it can mess with your hormone leptin, which is responsible primarily for satiety, that is, knowing when you're full, so you stop eating. Dr. Gottfried has this particular variant gene, and the way that she helps control it, or the ways that you can help control it, are moderate exercise, about 30 minutes per day, eating lots of fiber, and choosing a low carbohydrate diet. They then talk about the EVOA4 gene, which is associated to a much higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. The more copies of the gene that you get, it increases your risk. This gene plays a role in how fat is processed in your body, and so going on a low-fat diet can actually lead to inflammation in the body and lead to heart disease as well. Dr. Gottfried mentions that she has the CHEK2 mutation, which is a gene that shows predisposition for breast cancer, and she says that she finds it liberating to know her genes so that she knows where to focus her efforts so that she can prevent those potential diseases. Chris stresses the point of just how unique we really are and how there is no one-size-fits-all, and our genetics really proves that. And I would add that, say, even if you have an identical twin, there will be some variance in genetic expression. You truly are unique, and diagnostic tests can really help to let you know if you're on the right path for optimal health. Dr. Gottfried talks a bit about the clock gene, which is the one that is involved with your circadian rhythms, that is your sleep-wake cycles. It's also involved with the hormone ghrelin, which is the hormone that's primarily makes you hungry. And she says that if you're not on a regular sleep cycle, you're not getting enough sleep, it can actually lead to obesity. She mentions a short sleep gene, which 3 to 4% of the population have. These people can get by quite well on about 6 hours of sleep, but that means that the rest of us, 97% of us do not have it and need to really get a good sleep. Dr. Gottfried talks about an interesting study that had to do with populations that experience high levels of stress. So she actually looked at Holocaust survivors and people that were involved with the 9/11 attacks. And it showed that people that went through a traumatic event like that, it can create, she describes it as a sticky note on your genes that can get passed on to the next generation. So it doesn't mean that the next generation is going to have post-traumatic stress disorder, but it does mean that they are at a higher probability to have it. They talk a bit about diet, and Chris is of the opinion that there's no one size fits all, and Dr. Gottfried is in the same boat. She mentions that she tried the ketogenic diet that is very low carb and burning ketones or fat for fuel, and that she actually gained weight because of her genetic variants. It caused inflammation in her body and caused her to gain weight. Now, most people lose weight when they go on a ketogenic diet, so it really does depend. Like, you really have to experiment and try it and see how you feel and the results that you're getting to know if it's good for you. All right, that'll wrap it up for that particular episode. So just as a reminder, that was How to Slow Down Aging, episode of Revolution Health Radio, hosted by Chris Kresser, and his guest was Dr. Sara Gottfried, who has a new book out called Younger, if you're interested in checking that out. So I'd like to add on just a few takeaways for that episode for people that want to slow down aging. So inflammation, of course, is a huge one. So you want to have a healthy body weight and very minimal belly fat, that's visceral fat, because it acts as an endocrine gland, which increases inflammation in your body. Do your very best to cut down on refined sugar, because that causes inflammation in your body, leads to the visceral fat as well. There are blood tests available that can show levels of inflammation in the body. You may want to consider having those checked. Okay, the third and final episode that I'm going to digest is episode 84, Shift Your Metabolism for Peak Energy and Fat Loss, with Mark Sisson on the Earn Your Happy podcast with Lori Harder. Mark is the author of the best-selling book, The Primal Blueprint. This blueprint is essentially a way for you to make real-time decisions where you get to enjoy your life and you don't feel like you are depriving yourself, but the decisions you make are healthy ones that serve you in the long run. The idea is that you make healthy food choices and you eat food that you absolutely enjoy, but you don't feel guilty if you have the occasional couple bites of a chocolate cake. And also when it comes to movement, you choose an exercise that you actually enjoy as opposed to, dread going to the gym. You find something that you like. I like to add that, we're all different and different people are going to like different things. Some people are very social, so going to some type of a class, some type of a meetup group is going to make a lot of sense. Some people are more introverted and they're going to be better off just going for a run by themselves. It really is an individualistic thing, so you got to find that thing that works for you. Mark talks a bit about cutting sugar back, and I totally agree with that sentiment. Sugar is the modern scourge of humanity as far as I'm concerned. It's super addictive. It's highly inflammatory. It leads to obesity and a cascade of health problems. So the less sugar you eat, the much more less likely you're going to get chronic diseases. Mark also talks about eliminating industrial seed oils, and I'm on the same page here as well. Things like soybean oil, cottonseed oil, canola. A lot of these are genetically modified. They are inflammatory for the body. They are not good for health. So you're going to want to get rid of these unhealthy oils. And he also recommends getting rid of processed foods. And I'm, again, totally agree. These processed foods are loaded with crap, and you're much better off getting them out of your life. He also recommends getting rid of highly processed grains because they essentially turn to sugar in your body once they get processed. So I agree with that as well. Cutting down on the grains as much as possible is very healthy advice. So that's what Mark recommends not to eat. What he recommends to eat are grass-fed meats, cold water fish, nuts, seeds, fruits. He recommends a vegetable-based diet. So basically you eat more vegetables than anything else, and I'm totally on the same page with that. And only eat healthy fats, so that means eliminating trans fats and hydrogenated fats that you find in processed foods. Now, the healthy fats that you should eat are olive oil, avocado oil, and even grass-fed butter and grass-fed ghee. Lori asks Mark for tips to help kick the sugar habit. And Mark concedes that it's not that easy to do because we are hardwired to look for sugar. He mentions that through human evolution, it was very rare to find any sugar in the human diet. And today, now it's a totally different story. There's sugar everywhere. Now, Mark recommends trying some coconut butter when you have a sugar craving. I never tried that before, and I'm curious. I think I'm going to give that a shot because I certainly do have my sugar cravings. Now, he also recommends cutting out all sweets, including artificial sweeteners, even natural ones like stevia, because even with stevia, you're not getting the calories or the glucose spikes, but your brain is still getting that sweet hit, and so it keeps that cycle of wanting more sweets. Mark also recommends berries because they are great, have a bit of sweetness to them, but they're loaded with nutrition and a great go-to snack for a transition away from sugar. Now, a big part of Mark's primal blueprint is getting your body adapted to burning fat. So you're not so much relying on glucose anymore, but you're relying on burning fat. So you burn away your excess fat stores that you don't want. You're feeling more satiated throughout the day. You're not getting those up and down craving cycles that you see when you eat lots of carbohydrates. Mark also makes the point that when you are a glucose burner, you're seeing lots of free radical damage from the metabolism of sugar. Whereas if you become more of a fat burner, you don't have that free radical damage, and therefore you will age less rapidly. He also makes the case that when you eat food, it signals your genes to do different things. So when you're eating a low-carb, high healthy fat diet, you're telling your body to produce more mitochondria, which are the energy factories within your cells. It kind of stands to reason if you got more of these energy factories, you're going to have more energy in general, which sounds pretty good to me. Mark says the transition over from a carbohydrate-focused diet to a fat one takes a couple weeks. And so once you start eliminating the carbohydrates, your body starts to adapt. And one of the signs that you have got there is that when you get up in the morning, you don't feel famished, like you could go, say, until 11 o'clock without actually eating. And then you know that your body is burning the fat, that stores that you have, as opposed to being hungry for glucose. Mark likes to keep it simple and really says that you eat when you're hungry and you don't eat when you're not hungry. Mark says a very good skill to create is that you eat, 11, 12 bites, and then you realize that you're not hungry anymore, even if there's food on your plate, and you can box it up, give it away, keep it as leftovers. Now, that's a tough one for me, and I think a lot of people, because growing up, we were taught to, finish your plate. I remember being a kid, and it's like you finish your plate or you can't leave the table kind of a thing. And I to this day, I always finish my plate. If I go to a restaurant, I eat everything that's there, and I'm looking at other people's plates to scavenge off of. I don't know. I got some work to do. Now, Mark recommends for people that want to try to become a fat burning type of a person as opposed to a glucose burner, that you would start your day with an omelet with vegetables and maybe a cup of coffee, then have a salad with lunch with a healthy dressing, so it's avocado oil or olive oil based, and then have a handful of macadamia nuts or other nuts that as a snack. And then for dinner, have some type of protein with lots of vegetables. And for dessert, you could have some berries with a whipped cream on top. Now, Mark said it may take a couple weeks of eating like this to get there, but when you do, what he finds is that people, they start to lose weight, they have more energy, their thinking becomes more clear. Another advantage to eating this way is that you're eating less inflammatory foods, which causes your body to be in a chronic state of inflammation and to hold on to excess water. He says it's just like when you sprain your ankle, your body puffs up, and a lot of that is just because of water. And he mentions that, people that, go on a diet and they lose, 10, 20 pounds right away, it's because they're losing that water first, because you can't burn off fat that quickly. But you're getting rid of that water because you're cutting back on the inflammatory foods. Lori adds that she used to be a big calorie counter, and it got to the point where it just drives you nuts when you're trying to count every single calorie. And she found it to be very liberating by cutting out the sugar, because then she's not counting calories. She's not worried about all the other things like she would eat, like she'd be concerned about whipped cream. Now she's not worried about the whipped cream at all, or the cheese. It's kind of funny. I started doing this berry dessert where I'd have like blueberries, which are great for the brain health, and mixed with other berries, and then have the whipped cream on, and it is yummy. Mark mentions that one of the pitfalls that can happen for people is that they'll start eating more fat, but then they don't really cut out the sugar, and that is not going to get you where you want to go. Mark makes the point that we should kind of change our thinking when it comes to food, because most people think, all right, how much can I eat and not gain weight? And he suggests that we change that. We should think about how little can I eat and maintain a healthy weight and never get sick and have lots of energy, because he believes that most people are really eating more than they really need to eat. They talk a bit more about sugar, and some interesting facts is that in our body we have roughly about 5 grams of sugar floating around in our bloodstream at any one time, which is not much. It's about a teaspoon. But when we look at people who are diabetic and they have trouble modulating their sugar, this excess sugar in the bloodstream reacts with proteins and it starts to gum up your system. It gums up your capillaries, and that's why people experience vision problems, and they start to have gets to the point where they have issues swelling in their limbs. So not a good place to be. All right, well, that is going to wrap it up for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And again, that was Mark Sisson, Sisson, of thedailyapple.com. He's got a blog, and he is the best-selling author of the Primal Blueprint, if you're interested, picking that up. And he was on the Earn Your Happy podcast with Lori Harder. We have reached the end of this episode. I hope you have found a piece of information you can use to improve your life or the life of your loved ones with. If you feel that I've helped you in some way, I ask that you help me in return. Liking, rating, reviewing, sharing, and or subscribing all help me rise in the search engine rankings so I can reach and help even more people. Subscribing being the most important one. Thanks in advance. As always, I will continue to bring you the health stuff you need to know.